All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this virtual event to discuss artificial intelligence in the future of journalism. Thank you for joining me in this afternoon. Ideally, I would love to have done this in person and visit people in newsrooms in journalism schools, but unfortunately, it's not possible. But today's virtual session is being hosted by New Lab. And so for those of you who are not familiar with New Lab, it's a fascinating community of experts and innovators that come together to develop new technology. And it's a place where entrepreneurs and engineers come together to solve big problems using technology of all kinds. Earlier in this year, I left the Wall Street Journal where I was the R&D chief in the newsroom to launch a new company at New Lab. The company is called Applied Excel. And we are applying computational journalism to develop information tools for different industries with a mission of tracking the health of people, places, and planet. So that's a little introduction of New Lab in Applied Excel for context. But today, the topic of conversation is AI in journalism. So we'll have the chance to go through Q&A at the end, but please feel free to use the Q&A button on Zoom. I'll be sure to look at what everyone is asking and posting. And so we'll start the session by a brief presentation. And I tried to collect as many case studies and make it as interactive as possible, given the circumstances. And followed by audience QA, as I mentioned. And then at the end, we'll have the announcement of the book giveaway. So we'll have 5 winners that were picked randomly. So stay tuned for that at the end, and maybe you'll be one of the lucky people who got one of the books. So let's get started and talk about the subject at hand. So the growth of AI seems to be affecting or impacting every single industry, from automotive to healthcare, but also industries like journalism that have at its foundation a very human dimension. But the reality is that AI is transforming journalism in all of its value points. So from the news gathering, so how the information can now be sourced through algorithms that mine large documents, mine sensors, social media, the production process of how that raw material, that raw information is turned into stories, into video, into text, in different multimedia packages. That's also being transformed by artificial intelligence of course, changing the distribution where we now have models for automated distribution, optimization, and personalization of all sorts. So this brief presentation is structured around these 3 core topics of how AI is transforming news gathering, production, and distribution. And my goal here is to try to be as practical as possible and show you several examples of these transformations in action by different news organizations. So let's start with AI in news gathering. So the process of retrieving information, either it be numerical data or text documents, or even getting information directly from video or audio, a process that has traditionally been done very manually, where a reporter or a journalist contacts a source or does research by looking at different documents. But in the world of augmented journalism, where AI is used to enhance the news gathering process, there are all sorts of techniques that are being used. And I'll start with a brief case study of Reuters, who leverages a platform called NewsTracer to help monitor emerging topics within social media. And so the idea here is to look for anomalies, so things that patterns that normally don't occur together. So this has to do with, could be the language that is used on a tweet or any other social media post, or even how fast a certain type of post has been shared. And so all of these signals provide automated newswire of sorts that function as an alerting system. This system was used by Reuters, among many other examples, during unfortunate shooting in San Bernardino, California in 2015, where the system detected words like shooting and people running. And the system allowed the reporters at Reuters to break the story before other news organizations. But beyond social media, there are other ways of deriving meaning in mining insight. Another example that is fascinating and now used by many other news organizations is text mining. So the ability to evaluate, analyze, and reference different documents and create relationships between the entities that are mentioned in those documents. So entities could be people, places, it could be dates, it could be organizations. And so this was used by, in this example, text mining was used by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists to conduct research on the Paradise Papers that looked into financial crime in other financial irregularities. And so the process here, the journalistic process, would have required manual analysis of over 13 million documents, so tax returns, bank statements, all sorts of financial documents. But with the help of AI, specifically natural language processing, journalists were able to filter through this information much faster. In simple terms, the way, and this is for illustration purposes only, the way that natural language processing works is that, among other things, is able to extract concepts from text documents and identify relationships between those documents. So a relationship could be between two locations or two organizations, and then the journalists will look into this information and derive meaning. And so one thing that is important to mention here is that although we are talking about AI and in some cases automation of certain processes, it doesn't mean that the human, the journalist, gets replaced by a machine. The idea here, or the most effective way of implementing AI in journalism, is actually to think about it as a collaboration between a human and a machine. And this is no different than all the other technological advancements that we have seen in the past. From the introduction of telephones in newsrooms in the 40s or 50s, where you now have this technology that allowed you to reach out to sources and ask questions, to later on, the introduction of the computer and all sorts of things. So AI is really a tool to advance the practice of journalism. It's changing it in different ways, but it's still a tool that human journalists have control over. A few other examples where AI is changing news gathering and analysis is specifically around machine learning. So being able to find patterns within data. There's a fascinating news report by BuzzFeed published a few years ago where journalists at BuzzFeed News trained the machine learning model to look for patterns in aircrafts. In the routes that aircrafts took to essentially understand, the routes of the planes of Department of Homeland Security, FBI, and so on. What's interesting here is that during that investigation, the AI system flagged planes used for skydiving as being planes from Department of Homeland Security or FBI, because the patterns were actually very similar. So, you fly over an area and you stay there for a while until the person goes in skydive, so that the route is actually very similar to a spying plane where it may be stay in the same location for a while. So the point here being that algorithms can make mistakes, and this error or this false positive that I just mentioned with BuzzFeed News was caught by a human. So human journalists and editors have a crucial role in maintaining these algorithms in check, and in some cases audit them. And so this is the first sort of warning slide that I have in this presentation, where I really want to call out the fact that algorithms, as I mentioned, make mistakes. They are biased. They are biased sometimes. And so the same way that journalists ask questions from a human source, they should be able to ask questions from algorithms and to understand their inner workings. So things like understanding where the data came from, or how the algorithm is developed, or whether there's the ability to have human override. So in the case of BuzzFeed, it's important that the information is not just published automatically, saying there's a spy plane flying over New York State. There needs to be some level of vetting, and so there are different components of questions that should be asked from algorithms. And at the end of the day, the process of evaluating these systems is the same process as evaluating the validity of any other story, even sourced with traditional methods. So keep in mind that although the results are generated by a machine, they can produce mistakes, and at times they produce errors that humans forget to check. So I was sharing a little bit about how AI is changing news gathering, so the process of getting information. But what happens once you have that information? Either you have a document, or you have some sort of insight on an investigation. How can you use AI to help in the production process? So I'll start by a well-known case in the industry at the Associated Press. The news agency uses natural language generation to automate part of its financial coverage and sports coverage. And so the process here is that once you have very clean, structured data, so imagine financial reports that are organized by rows and columns, you can use natural language generation to wrap that data around text. So the example that you see here on the side is actually is a story by the Associated Press on a college basketball story where there's a recap, and if you read this story, it sounds like a human wrote it. And so, although I say news automation, the reality is that there's a lot of vetting that goes through this process. When I worked at the Associated Press and we were working on these types of projects, we had to validate, the output of the machines and make sure that other errors were not surfaced. And the reality is that, through this process, the Associated Press was able to not only scale the production of content, but actually reduce the error rate, because the most of errors that occurred in the past were really driven by the source of data. So just to put this in context, for business coverage alone, the Associated Press went from being able to cover 300 stories manually to 300 companies manually through traditional methods, to being able to cover over 4,000 companies. And so the process here relies on having data journalists identify, validate data sources. So in that case that I just mentioned, it's financial data, it could also be sports data. And that data, once validated, once extracted from different providers, data journalists format it and put it into a structured table. So this is, in general terms, the process of normalizing and cleaning data. And a lot of the uses of natural language generation, so the AI technology that allows you to turn data into text, requires the development of a template. So a template is essentially a formatting of the story, where you have to think about all the different combinations and variations of the story. So if you're writing a story on, a financial, on the financial results of Apple or any other company, you would think about, okay, I'm writing this story. Apple posted profits of $1 billion. And this was as expected or as anticipated by the analysts, or maybe it was not. So you have to think about all the different variations of the story. And so this is called branch writing, where the journalist, specifically the automation editor, has to write, these pretty comprehensive formulas in plain text that are then through the natural language generation softwares combined with data to generate a fully automated story. And so that's one of the most used methods that still requires the development of templates, and it's a very reliable method for news organizations because there's full control, and then there's full accountability by the newsroom. But there are new types of natural language, so the technology that allows you to write text automatically. There are new types of this technology that allow you to create fake text at scale, with pretty much no human intervention. So the example that you see here on the right, this is a fully automated text where I wrote this little prompt. Newsmakers is a book about journalism and artificial intelligence. And then the system the system added all of these different sentences to this prompt. So the book is an introduction to the growing role of artificial intelligence in shaping news, which is accurate. It was originally published by Random House, which is incorrect. My publisher is Columbia University Press. The author received a grant from the National Academy of Sciences, the National Institute for Advancement Research, and National Institute of Health, which is also not true. And the book is ranked among the top 10 of the top 20 in academic literature for its analysis and use, which is also not true. So, but if you're someone with no context on, in this case, the book, you could, it's perfectly well written. It makes sense, and nothing really tells you that this is fake or not. So now imagine this technology being used for disinformation campaigns where bad actors use it for writing fake articles about politicians, different stakeholders, executives, and so on. And so it's really difficult to catch this type of fake text, although there are new techniques in digital forensics that allow you to to more programmatically catch this type, but it's definitely a risk that we'll be seeing in the future as natural language evolves. But there's, not everything is bad news. There's obviously many positive uses of artificial intelligence in the news production process. That can really, speed up the operation, free up journalists' time so they can focus on higher impact type of work. One of these examples is using using computer vision and image recognition to help with video labeling. So if you are a broadcaster and you have an assignment where you are shooting a video, then likely you'll go back to the newsroom, you'll have to edit it, you have to catalog it. So a lot of those things are now being automated, where you can run a video through a system, and those computer vision and image recognition systems are able to to tag the elements in the photo or in the video. They are able to provide context of whether there's a crowd, or there's there's a certain object like a car or a bus or anything of that nature. And so this really accelerates the process of pre-production in research in video. This is used or was used by Sky News on a piece for the UK royal wedding, where the AI system was able to recognize the guests and public figures attending the wedding just by looking at the videos. So these are some of the examples that I was mentioning of video cataloging. But again, with anything related to AI and algorithms, we always need to be aware of the possible mistakes. So this is a snapshot of a fascinating research done by academics at MIT Media Lab, where they evaluated the classification, the gender classification by different video recognition providers, so Microsoft, Face++, and IBM, and they found some pretty pretty alarming results, where these computer vision algorithms showed an error rate of 35% for darker skinned women, when compared to just 1% error rate for lighter skinned men. So in this case, the algorithm produces sexist and racist results. And so likely often the reason why these errors occur is that the way that the models are trained, it's a problem how the models are trained. So in this example of video recognition, as you are developing an AI system, you have to show the computer, thousands, hundreds of thousands or millions of photos of different people, usually or often. Those data sets might be skewing one way or the other. So maybe they have a lot of males, or maybe they have a lot of white people. And so this sort of this process propagates the biases in humans, because at the end of the day, there was a human selecting those data sets used to train the models. But there are also some other really cool applications of computer vision and AI that touches on video. So this is a case study by the BBC where they tested synthetic video. So a newscaster who only speaks English was able to use AI by a company, a startup called Synthesia, to actually speak Spanish, Mandarin, and Hindi. And the way that it works is that the AI system was able to track the movements of the face of the newscaster, and then match it to a native speaker of the language. So if you see here, there's a newscaster on the right, and then another person on the left who is actually moving their face and in replicating the movement. So if you watch the video, it seems like this person is actually talking to in different languages. So this is a use of this technology that is actually very positive, where you can provide wider access at lower cost by translating newscasting in different languages. There's a similar use case that is being used by Xinhua, the Chinese news agency. And the approach here is a little different, where here you have sort of, almost like a puppet master controlling the movements of the video. Here, it's a fully digital, fully synthetic news anchor. And so both the image, as you can see, and then when you hear the newscast, it sounds and looks like a human. And so the idea here is to be able to personalize the news in different languages with different backgrounds, and create this highly interactive news broadcast. So these, I would say these types of, synthetic video used in news are very much in experimental phase, but it's interesting to look at these outliers in these case studies to imagine what may come next. So, as with any other, application of AI, there's always, people, bad actors that use it for bad purposes. And my warning here is to be on the lookout for deepfakes. So deepfakes are videos, images, text, and audio that are generated using AI to to trick and deceive an audience into thinking that a person said or did something that they actually didn't do. So the example that you see here is using an approach to synthetic media called real-time reenactment, which is actually similar to the one that I showed you for the BBC, where you have a source actor, you have a target actor, in this case, former President Bush, and the source actor is controlling the display and the movement of the mouth and eyes and in all the facial expressions of this target actor. And so you can imagine, not only now it's possible to replicate video, but it's also possible to replicate voice in audio. There are many different initiatives by news organizations and as well as technology companies to fight and prevent this type of content. So as an example, the Wall Street Journal launched an internal forensics committee, which is comprised of different editors and video specialists to evaluate any possible deepfakes. There are different companies, different technology companies developing solutions to help catch these deepfakes in a much more streamlined way, because in some cases you can see that they are fake and there's like flickering and the image is blurred. Other cases it looks, very, very realistic, and it's difficult to distinguish between a real video and a fake video. So as a recap, so far I've shared a little bit about how AI is changing news gathering, so how you collect and source information. Also talked about how it's transforming the production and the processing of that information. And now I want to talk a little bit about the distribution. So once you have the information, once you have the news, the content, what do you do with it, and how can you use AI to maximize the impact of the reporting and the storytelling? So one of the things that most of you have heard by now is the idea of personalization. So being able to serve content based on your interests, based on your reading habits and in your preferences. The brief case study that I have here is from the Times, but many different organizations use these to drive engagement and to improve the user experience. So this is sort of, I would say, personalization 1.0. The second wave of personalization is really changing the nature of the content, the tone, the language, the point of view to fit the interests of the reader. So as an example, if you are a soccer fan and you're watching Real Madrid versus Barcelona, and your team is Real Madrid, you might see a headline: Real Madrid beat Barcelona, by 2 goals. But if you are a Barcelona player, you might want to see the point of view of your team, which is, Barcelona lost against Real Madrid. And so you can imagine all of this process being applied to all sorts of things, including not only sports where there's a point of view, but also politics. But with any other use cases of AI, there's always the risk for the technology to be misused. And so this is another thing that I want to call out, which is this idea of information bubbles. So on one end, you have all of these different systems, and you interact with them every single day. You have Facebook and Twitter and all these aggregators where you are being shown articles and videos that in a way show display things that you're interested in and have your points of view. And so if you're only exposed to your point of view, if you're, let's say, watching YouTube videos and you're looking at watching political speeches on YouTube, as you use the platform or any other platform, you'll end up seeing more of that content. So that propagates and augments your preconceived beliefs. And so what happens is that we as a society retract and start having these very narrow points of view, because your perception of the world is informed by the media that you consume. So it's a real danger to to have personalization without human intervention or oversight. And in fact, some newsrooms have editors that are essentially algorithmic editors that are looking at whether a recommendation engine or a personalization engine within their publications is propagating these beliefs. So as you hear all of these examples, I'm sure you're already thinking that, well, the role of the journalist in sort of this focus on accountability and transparent is more important than ever. Because as journalists, we are trained to look for biases, we are trained to look for objectivity, and as AI is a nascent industry, in some cases that transparency is not there yet, and in other cases there are errors and biases like the ones that I shared with you today. I want to also talk about some other applications of AI for the engagement process. So these brief case studies from the New York Times, which uses machine learning to improve the moderation process of comments on their site. And so they use this system called Perspective, which is a machine learning model that is trained to look for online harassment and issues a toxicity score. And so the way that many of these systems are used by newsrooms is that it's not that there's complete automated vetting of and moderation of these comments. These systems simply help human moderators quickly find harm or abusive content in a much more streamlined way. But there are obviously many different problems. One of them, again, is the problem of algorithmic bias. In this case, there are systems for moderation that have been studied and audited and have shown that there's actually some bias because it doesn't take into consideration how different groups of people from different economic, racial, country background talk. And so it can really flag something as having toxicity and potentially be flagged for removal, even if it's not meant to be, a toxic comment or trolling or anything of that nature. So again, the AI is trained by is developed by humans, and these systems are trained through data sets that are most likely collected by humans. And so it's crucial for us to apply journalistic standards to evaluate the outputs of any algorithm. But on the other side of the spectrum, AI can also be used to prevent biases, and this is a really, really cool case study by the Financial Times. There are other news organizations doing similar projects where the FT developed a bot named She Said, He Said, that tracks whether a reporter quoted the person that the reporter quoted is male or female, and this system is essentially notifying journalists as they write the story of whether they have, too many male sources or if it's a balanced story. And so this is designed to to have more representation in storytelling. And this is, an example where AI can be used to fight bias. And obviously, I should say that, it's important to think about business models and how AI and machine learning and all of these different technologies can help create a more robust and healthy organization. The example that I have here for you is that of the Wall Street Journal, that has a paywall that is powered by machine learning, that is able to measure reader activity and understand, what's the best pricing, when should it present an offer for a subscription or to upgrade the your subscription. And so this is really driving engagement and personalizing the subscription experience to each reader. So I talked about AI impacting all of these value points of the news process. I want to talk a little bit about implementing AI in the newsroom, and then we'll have some Q&A. And I'll start by a question that I often get when I'm presenting and talking to colleagues, which is, how exactly are AI newsroom applications built? And what are some of the best practices? And so my answer to that is that we should, in a newsroom, or in the context of, I should say, news innovation, we should be doing things to solve problems, not just for the sake of experimentation. So it's the starting point should always be identifying, a newsroom problem or a pain point. So something, maybe it takes a long time for us to retrieve a certain type of data, or it takes or it's very difficult to analyze and find patterns within millions of documents. So what's the real problem in documenting it? The second step is about data availability and looking for the quality of that data, and followed by the selection of what type of AI, what type of algorithm, what type of model can be used. I've talked about different types of AI. I talked about natural language generation, which is the technology that allows you to produce text and write text like a human. I talked about natural language processing, which is being able to understand and find relationships within text. I talked about machine learning, which is about finding patterns within data. And I even talked about, technologies like computer vision that are helping with image recognition. And there are many other things that, many other domains in AI that we should be paying attention to. But it's very important to select the right model and look for all of the things that I mentioned in terms of bias and errors by looking at the output that these systems produce, and which is, this stage of verifying the model, and then only then building a tool that either can be used internally or externally by readers. And I want to call out a really cool use case by the Wall Street Journal. There's a recent Medium post on this project by the team at the Wall Street Journal, describing the process of the development of a tool that is now being used by to cover the election. So this is Talk 2020, which analyzes 30 years of public statements by different presidential candidates, and looks for, it's able to search and look for certain patterns in language. And so what's interesting here is that this started as a question, or I should say a problem that came from the editors and reporters who were doing political coverage, that it was, difficult to do, or, not difficult, but it took a while to do fact checking and do research on what the candidates said. And so this was a solution to that problem. And so the tool that originally started as an internal newsroom tool for journalists eventually evolved into a public-facing tool that anyone can go and search and navigate by candidate, by topic. But the idea here is that there's a product thinking in the newsroom that then is translated into an actual product. And so this is something that one of the last things that I want to share with you is that, technology and product development are becoming fundamental skills that that newsrooms are leveraging. And that journalists should be familiar with. And so this idea of taking iterative approaches of testing ideas. So evaluating if something works before devoting a lot of resources to it. And so I think journalism is the prime example or prime industry to apply this type of iterative approach. And one of the techniques that I often implement is the idea of a minimal viable story. So rather than, let's say you want to test a new algorithm or a new technology, rather than building an entire tool, can you test it in a very incremental way? So an example could be, if you want to launch, a voice briefing on Amazon Alexa or Google Home, which, it requires development. Can you test this automated voice system in more incremental, smaller steps? So you could possibly, use one article, use a text-to-speech tool. That there are many open source tools that I'll be sure to share as a follow-up of this conversation, and then use that test to evaluate whether it's viable. So is this a methodology that is viable? Is it feasible? Does the newsroom have the technical ability to do it? And most importantly, is it desirable? So if you create a audio or voice briefing, will your readers want to engage with it? And so this is the product mentality that we need in newsrooms, where we have to think about the audience. And so as journalists, we are trained to, to do our reporting, research it extremely well, and only at the end show it to our readers. AI is allowing for much more interactive and iterative approaches for testing. So I'll go through this very quickly. I see there's many great questions, and I want to make sure that I answer some of them. AI is creating many new jobs in news media. One big concern or a question that I get is, is AI going to steal my job? And as a journalist, and my answer is that, as any other industry, when technology is implemented, roles will certainly evolve. But the reality of what I'm seeing is that there are completely new roles that 10 years ago didn't exist. There's automation editors that are responsible for implementing these systems. There are computational journalists who are using data science to do investigations. There are newsroom tool managers to, to be able to control and coordinate the implementation of all of these sorts of tools. And you see standards and ethics editors looking at ways of validating and vetting algorithms. So 4 important takeaways. Technology changes. So today's AI, next year will be blockchain. 10 years from now, it will be some other technology that we are not thinking about. Technology is always evolving. Journalistic standards remain the same. And so these principles are crucial to we should apply these principles to technology. AI can make can make errors. Apologies for the typo here. The best way for journalists to understand AI is to start with these experiments. And then finally, there are ethical considerations, as we've been discussing, in terms of implementing AI and journalism. So I want to make sure that I have some time for questions. I did add some questions of people who couldn't attend live, but luckily we have several questions here that I'll try to source. If I can open the here, give me 1 second. All right, seems like I have a few technical difficulties. So I'll while we solve this, I'll start with some of the questions that I received virtually. So the first question that I received was whether AI could ever be used as an arbiter for truth. I think some of the techniques that are being used in AI can get you closer to ground truth. So by being able to, to quantify and find relationships that before you weren't able to do as a journalist, at least, through more manual traditional processes. But I think the journalists will always have the role of vetting and validating these processes. And then one other question that we are getting here: how can AI contribute to reshaping a more sustainable model for publishing? This is a great question. So, I think there's opportunities for being more cost efficient. So you see all of, a lot of smaller newspapers having to manage, limited budgets. And so AI is as the potential to contribute to production and scale production in an efficient way, and help on the cost side. At the same time, it can also optimize revenue. So I mentioned some examples of how publications are using subscriptions or machine learning to optimize subscriptions. That's an example. So I'm very optimistic about AI enabling a new business model. We have a few, actually, we have several questions. If I don't have time to answer them on this call, I'll make sure to share a summary email with all of you. And I'll take another question here. How do you think journalists can help improve AI tools besides evaluating them, example, to overcome bias and make them even more useful? Well, that's a great question. And so I think there are opportunities to translate the editorial values and the editorial expertise of journalists, and understanding sort of the reasoning and the thought process of journalists, and implement those processes into machine learning models. And so in a way, transferring the insight and the way of evaluating the world in certain problems through a journalistic lens. So besides the validation, besides the vetting, I think a machine learning model that is trained on thinking like a journalist can be one that becomes highly relevant and accurate. It seems that I have time for one more question, and then we'll go into the announcing the giveaways. And I have a question here that says, a few years ago, it seemed like interactive articles are the future. I don't see them much these days, and I know it's really expensive to produce them. Have you heard of any AI-powered solutions to create those? So interactive articles, I think, a famous one was a really great piece by the New York Times called Snowfall. There was this beautiful interactive, article. And the person who asked this question is absolutely right. They are extremely expensive to produce. And in fact, many of these projects are one-off and you can't really reuse them. Although there are some sort of templates that you can use. But the reality is that there are many tools that allow you to now do, automate video production and have, really interesting sort of video transitions and images and have all sorts of interactive graphics, as well as sounds. And there's a few companies producing fully generative automated music that is being used by journalists for documentary making. And the value there is that the music is unique, and then there's a lot of the costs are very low for using a sort of a proprietary soundtrack, if you will. So unfortunately, we don't have more time to go through all of these great questions. We'll send you the summary. I'll try to answer these questions. And finally, I want to go through the book giveaway. So the way it worked is that we have, I think, close to 200 people registering. We picked 5 numbers at random, and then we looked at who those people were. And so the lucky winners are the second person who registered for the event, Jennifer Jones, then Michael Henlin, Fatima Thomas, Catherine Dempsey, and John Walker. So I hope you are still live. We'll be, congratulations, we'll be reaching out to you. And I really hope that you enjoyed the book. So I want to thank you all for connecting today and for spending this hour, talking about AI in journalism. I'm very happy to talk to any one of you after the session. My contact information will be provided in the follow-up email. But thank you all. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon.